So let's talk about putting your image onto your Scratchboard. Now everybody should have this small piece of Scratchboard that I gave you. It's just a smaller piece of the original. I went ahead, I'm gonna treat this kind of like a little mini version of what I gave you all. So let's pretend that it's the same size as the 8x10. I have a photo reference. Savannah, I hope you don't mind that I borrowed your photo. So a couple different ways. I would love for you guys to take a piece of paper and draw out your subject matter, but I know just starting with a really good foundation of proportions and things looking accurate, I know is very important to begin with, especially with a photo like this. It's very foreshortened, meaning depth is changing very rapidly. We're seeing the subject matter coming towards us, so proportions are distorted. So if that's the case, if Savannah in her picture that she has, if you're wanting to transfer this onto your Scratchboard, you can do that, or you can redraw it out on a separate piece of paper and recreate those contour lines to transfer onto this. Up to you. Is that going to be more time? Yes. But it just kind of depends on how original, you want to be. So if Savannah decides she's just going to get the outlines of her photo, since it is hers, you could shade the back with your 8B, 6B drawing pencil. Or if this is a drawing that you did, then you could shade that and transfer it on. So what does the transfer process look like? I drew like a little paw print here really quick, and then I shaded the back with graphite. Graphite has some great transferring properties. So I'm going to lay it over top of the Scratchboard. Let's pretend that this is full size. You can take a little bit of tape to hold it in place, paper clips, but you just want to make sure this is not shifting and moving, but you don't want to damage the Scratchboard material as well. So once you have this attached over top, let's pretend that I do, then you can take a ballpoint pen, and I just kind of lightly, I'm not looking to like scratch through the paper or anything like that, but you can trace out your contour lines. If you want to mark where there's highlights or shadows, like if you mark where the shadows are at, that's usually going to be the Scratchboard that you leave alone. So I try and avoid not having like the graphite on the areas that I'm going to keep, black, and maybe mark in the highlights. So once you outline it, you remove it, and you should see a little bit of kind of that pencil line gray now on the surface of your Scratchboard. Now I do have the metal, the knives for the scratch art, but I also gave you guys a wooden stylus. I'm gonna try mine out, and I gotta find it. Where did it go? Just to see the difference between the two, since I know you guys are going to be using the wooden stylus. All right, I guess I'm gonna have to look for the wooden stylus. All right, so I went ahead and found some of the materials that you guys are going to be using. Everybody should have the wooden stylus that I sent home, and that way you can use this from home. We're going to try out and see how that goes. And then these are the ones I'm going to have in the classroom. So these are scratch art knives. Here's kind of a diamond shape where you get more of the blade on the side and the point. It's not so sharp that you're gonna, cut yourself just because you touch it, but it is kind of pointy, so be careful. And then the other one is a rounded diamond shape, so you're gonna get a little bit wider mark. So I am trying to create the highlights based on here in the photograph, this little paw print here. The light is very, very subtle. So there's, the dog I can tell is relatively light, but I'm going to get some darker tones on the right side. So instead of outlining my pencil lines, I don't recommend that. Treat it like it's the texture. So the dog has really, really short hair. So instead of just outlining it, I'm trying to get looks like I have to kind of use this at an angle a little bit. It's not working as well as the metal one, but it is working. This was kind of my solution to make sure everybody at least had something to use on their scratch art. Already I can tell it's going to go a lot faster with the metal. So I'm just kind of defining that edge by the really short hair that's on the dog. Paying attention to the direction of it. And a couple things to think about when you're working. I would put a scrap sheet of paper under your fingers because I notice sometimes, you know, your hands have oils on them and that could start putting fingerprints on there. One thing. And then it does leave kind of like a little bit of this black powder. It's essentially like ink, you know, over top paint. So sometimes I take it over to the trash can and kind of shake it out towards the end. But it can get a little messy with those little particles of ink that's been put over top or paint. So I notice it's darker here, so I'm going to be real careful not to put too many lines on there. Very, very tiny work that I'm, you know, doing right here, but that's kind of the nature of the medium, is just these little tiny marks. All right, so just a couple things from the time-lapse video. As I was working on the paw, I realized an eye, the dog's eye, would be so much more fun. So I went ahead and sketched out a quick eye, got those, you know, contour lines, transferred it on, and started scratching. Now I have noticed that the metal scratch art tools are a lot easier to work with versus the wooden ones that I gave you guys, but these work pretty good for some thick solid lines with a little like whiter lines. I'm looking to really bring out the white in that eye. I could see this being really helpful, so I'm going to kind of go through and really shine up some of those white, bright whites that I felt like I was having a hard time doing with the metal. There's definitely some good to the wooden stylus, but it looks like it removes pretty thick, and you may want some of those finer lines. So definitely, you know, when you're in the classroom, go back and forth with the different tools, because I like how some of those marks are a lot easier to get using the different widths. But from home, the wooden stylus, you know, is going to be fine. You just need to be aware that it's a lot more sensitive to the different marks, you know, meaning you gotta be real gentle with it for a thin mark, and then you can apply a little more pressure and clear out some areas. All right, so hopefully this video was helpful. And I really enjoyed studying the eye. So that would be a good example on this, but don't spend so much time on this that you kind of lose your energy for the next, you know, your final scratch board, because that is a lot of work, but we got plenty of time. Another thing about when you create textures, and I know I keep saying this about, you know, the direction, the width, but if you have things kind of uniform, meaning like they all perfectly line up, there's going to be a different appearance, or, you know, has a different, more random look if they don't perfectly line up. So there were some areas where I noticed things would line up, and then areas where it seemed a little more random, and so you kind of go in different directions versus, you know, all lined up. So I thought I'd throw that out there. Little eyeball, it's a little bit bigger. Woo!